Hi there, it's the Time Lord here, and thank you very much for being faithful and watching this channel. If you're a first-time subscriber, thank you for watching. First-time viewer. It features some of my own music, theory of music, bits and pieces about composition, composers, their madness, music history, music news, and much, much more, and chat and so on. In this video, we're going to be asking a moral question, controversial question about Richard Wagner, who was born in Leipzig in Germany in May 1813. He was the ninth child to his parents. His dad was a clerk to local bobbies, police. His mom was the daughter of a baker, clearly used to having a bun in the oven, as it were. His dad died of typhoid when Richard Wagner was around 6 months old. His mom then shacked up with a friend, no record of them getting married in the church records. Wagner's mom can't be blamed for this, as she had 9 mouths to feed. What was she going to do? Her oldest son, Richard, grew up thinking that this new man of the house, Wilhelm Geyer, was his biological dad. Geyer loved theatre, and Richard grew up to appreciate and love the theatre too. He was so impressed at one performance that he later said that this one visit to the theatre kindled in him an almost demonic fire. Wagner enrolled at a local university, took composition lessons. His tutor was so impressed by Wagner, his young pupil, that he refused payment for his tuition. Wagner staged some early works courtesy of his brother's influence, and he returned to Leipzig to become musical director at an opera house. This was short-lived as the theatre closed down and left the young composer bankrupt. However, he'd fallen for an actress who got him another gig, and they married in 1836, but she left him in 1837 for another bloke, the first tragedy in a tempestuous marriage. Wagner bunked up with his sister-in-law for a while, but in 1838 he got back with his wife. They got back together. In 1839, it's rapid this, the husband and wife left town quickly as they'd amassed huge debts and left their creditors in their wake. Debts became a familiar theme in the life of Wagner. The couple ended up in London, then in Paris, where Wagner etched out a living writing poetry, trash and so on. He carried on composing, but ended up in Dresden staging an opera by considerable acclaim. For 6 years he lived there, appointed by the royal court of Saxony. He'd made it. He also became politically aware, however, joining the local socialists, playing a role in a minor unsuccessful uprising, and he had to flee the area. He spent 12 years in exile from Germany as a whole, little income financially, he was in debt. Female friend paid him a small income from her own pension. Wagner had an affair with another friend, and they plotted to elope. Wagner's wife disliked opera, she became depressed. Wagner himself became mentally unwell and he stopped composing for a while. He now shows his true political colours and writes a polemic entitled Judaism in Music. He argued that Jews had no emotional connection to Germany and the German spirit. He argued that Jews created music just to be popular and gain wealth and riches, as opposed to creating real works of art. He started composing what was to become the ring cycles of long opera. He ended up composing and gave several concerts, including one to Queen Victoria. He gained a patron who funded his writing back in Zurich, but Wagner started bonking his patron's wife and writing music inspired by her poetry. In Zurich, Wagner's wife intercepted a letter from this woman to Wagner and confronted him about the letter and the affair. Wagner left on his own for Venice. His new opera, Tannhauser, was performed at a jockey club. People liked it, but it didn't go well financially. Wagner left Paris and tried reconciliation with his wife, but after meeting, this didn't go well at all. Wagner left again. They tried again at getting back together. They separated, this time irrevocably. Wagner eventually caught a break as the new king Ludwig II came to the throne in Bavaria, and he liked Wagner's operas. In 1865, 15 years since his last opera had been performed, the new performance, Tristan and Isolde, is performed, and the wife of the conductor, though it's delayed, Cosima, gave birth. But guess who's the daddy? Correct, it was Wagner! Cosima was 24 years younger than Wagner, and the illegitimate child of a lady and her husband, the composer Franz Liszt, the daddy of Cosima, who disapproved of Wagner. Pot calling the kettle black, one feels, but the king was persuaded or forced by his court to banish Wagner from the court of Bavaria eventually. Wagner ends up at Lake Lucerne in Switzerland. His wife had died in January 1866, but he didn't attend his wife's funeral. They never met after they were irrevocably separated. Cosima wrote to her husband asking for a divorce, which was initially refused. He eventually gave consent after Wagner had had 2 more kids with Cosima. Wagner and Cosima got hitched. They settled down to apparent wedded bliss. Wagner set about finishing his ring cycles and he republished his pamphlet, Judaism in Music, which led to public protests at performances. When the ring cycles were performed, variations were varied. Grieg called it divine, but Le Figaro called the music the dream of a lunatic. After a financially disastrous music festival, Wagner embarked on his last known affair. He continued to write polemics, including What is German, a clearly anti-Semitic publication and in line with German nationalistic sentiment of the time. In 1883, Wagner travelled to Venice with his family for the winter. He died of a heart attack aged 69. There is a legend that he died after a confrontation by his wife Cosima over Wagner's amorous infatuation with another singer, but there's not really evidence of this and most historians reject it as myth. That's Wagner, who composed some of the most dramatic and beautiful opera there is. But should we say that we should be grateful to him for his art and his contribution and ignore the personality, life and his beliefs? In many cases, I agree, because we all have the capacity to lie, cheat, steal, commit adultery, get drunk, and more. But when someone writes premeditated words that reflect their deep views as being anti-Semitic or racist, then I question the validity of performing the work of the composer. A modern day equivalent perhaps might be that of Kanye West. For example, I've not followed or dissected this story, I just know it in brief, but there are perhaps some similarities, and Kanye West is being shunned and rejected by many today, and so surely we need to think about applying the same moral plumb line against the work of Wagner. In the UK, we had the mistaken publication in the national press from a daytime presenter, Robert Kilroy Silk, a number of years ago. He was sacked over his comments by the BBC. We've had recently Jeremy Clarkson writing pretty horrendous stuff about Meghan Markle without accountability or consequence. Is it time to review the work of Wagner and stop performing it? What would you do if you were asked to be part of a performance of the music of Wagner? What do you think? Thanks for watching. Keep on composing and playing.